There are stories so disturbing, so layered in mystery, that people stop talking about them. Not because they forget, but because remembering feels dangerous. This is one of those stories. A case buried under decades of silence, where those who spoke too loudly seemed to vanish, one by one. Officially, it began as a kidnapping. But unofficially, it became something far more terrifying, a chain of events that spiraled into death, deception, and whispers of a hidden hand pulling strings from the shadows. The Sazama case is still called Japan's #1 unsolved mystery, not just because it was never truly solved, but because it refuses to die. Every few years, it resurfaces, dragging with it old questions and fresh chills. How could so many people connected to one case die under strange, often violent, circumstances? Why did a teenage girl's disappearance trigger what looked like a coordinated silencing of witnesses, reporters, even police? Some believe this wasn't just a crime, but a curse. Others claim powerful people, too powerful to name, wanted the truth buried. Whatever the case, one thing is clear. This story is not just about what happened. It's about what they didn't want anyone to know. And it all started with a schoolgirl who never made it home. It was October 1st, 1963. The rain had just passed, leaving behind a crisp, clean sky and a soft breeze over the quiet town of Sazama. The streets glistened under the fading sunlight, and the fields swayed gently like nothing bad could ever happen here. But as the clock ticked past 6:30 p.m., something didn't feel right at the Nakata household. Kenji Nakata paced the floor. His younger sister Yoshiko, usually home by now from her high school in Kawaga, was nowhere to be seen. At first, he tried to brush it off. Maybe she went out with friends. Maybe she forgot to call. But the unease settled like fog in his chest. She had never done this before. Unable to sit still, Kenji grabbed his coat and headed out, his footsteps echoing through the narrow streets. At the school, the classroom was locked. Empty. Not a soul in sight. He searched the neighborhood, peered into alleys, checked corners where kids sometimes lingered after school, but Yoshiko had vanished. When he returned home around 7:30, the air felt heavier. That's when he noticed the white envelope wedged in the doorway. Inside was a ransom note, and with it, Yoshiko's student ID. The message was cold, threatening, and precise. Delivered 200,000 yen by midnight to a specific location, or never see her alive again. No police. No delays. No mistakes. The panic hit like a storm. The family broke into chaos, and within minutes, the police were called. But it was already clear this was no prank. Something unthinkable had begun. By the time the police read the ransom letter, they knew they were being tested. The kidnapper had laid out chillingly clear instructions. Deliver the money by midnight. No police involvement. No delays, or face the consequences. But the Saitama police believed they could outsmart him. They had a plan. A task force was formed, and by nightfall, over 40 officers were strategically positioned around the meeting location, a quiet shop called Sanza. The second daughter of the Nakata family would act as the courier, carrying a bag filled with mostly fake bills, real cash placed just on the top. The hope was to bait the suspect, then trap him mid-exchange. At exactly 11:55 p.m., she stood alone at the shop entrance, clutching the ransom bag. Every shadow held a heartbeat. Officers crouched in tea fields, hid behind trees, watching every movement. At 12:10, a man emerged, cautious, quiet, calculating. He didn't walk straight to her. Instead, he kept a distance, spoke softly from afar, as if sensing something was off. For 12 long minutes, tension tightened like a noose. Then suddenly, he shouted, "You called the police, didn't you?" His voice echoed. Panic erupted. He bolted into the darkness, vanishing into the rural fields before anyone could react. Despite their numbers, despite their planning, the police had been outplayed. The man hadn't arrived in a car. He came on foot, through a path no one had watched. 40 trained officers, and not one could stop him. It was more than a failure. It was humiliation, and the press would have a field day with it. At dawn, the fields surrounding Sanza were no longer peaceful. Police officers, humiliated from the night before, were now desperate for answers. Every patch of earth was examined, every blade of grass disturbed. And finally, just south of the shop, they found something: footprints. A trail pressed deep into the wet soil, winding through narrow farm paths, then suddenly cutting toward the river. And there they stopped. No drag marks, no splash. Just vanishing footsteps swallowed by water. It was as if the man had dissolved into the landscape. But something else caught their attention: a pig farm not far from the riverbank. It sat in the shadow of the gone bridge, right along the route Yoshiko would have taken home from school. The farm was run by a group of laborers from a marginalized social class known as the Burakumin, or Baku, historically outcast and forced into unclean jobs like butchering and funeral work. They lived on the fringes of society, often suspected before being understood. The area had long been ignored by city planners, yet now it stood at the heart of a possible crime scene. The police began to scrutinize the farm. Background checks revealed a disturbing pattern. Many workers had criminal records: theft, blackmail, even violent offenses. Rumors festered. Whispers of resentment, of buried tension, turned to loud accusations. The media latched on, painting the community with a single brushstroke. And just like that, suspicion had a new address, one that society already wanted to blame. For days passed. Hope was thinning, but the Nakata family clung to it like oxygen. Then, on May 4th, a farmer tending his field spotted something strange: a bicycle, half buried in the weeds at the edge of a forest. It was Yoshiko's. Just hours later, the search team followed a faint trail down a narrow farm path near a wheat field. That's where they found her. A shallow dirt pit, hidden just off the roadside, cradled the lifeless body of a young girl. It was Yoshiko. There were no more doubts. The worst fear had become reality. Police sealed the scene. Forensic teams moved quickly, but there was something hauntingly still about it all. Near the body, they found a rough rope, possibly used to move her. A worn-out school uniform. No signs of a struggle that could change what they already knew. Later that evening, the autopsy confirmed what no one wanted to hear. Yoshiko had died before the ransom drop. Around 4:20 p.m. on May 1st, long before her family ever received the letter. She never had a chance. Her fate was already sealed. That single detail turned everything upside down. The ransom note wasn't a desperate demand. It was a cruel game. A performance. Someone had staged it all knowing she was already gone. The Nakata family collapsed under the weight of the news. The public exploded in anger. How could 40 officers be outwitted while the victim lay buried in a field nearby? Accusations flew. Protesters marched. And from that moment, this wasn't just a kidnapping. It was a national failure. As the investigation deepened, the focus tightened around the pig farm. Blood samples were quietly collected from its workers, 27 in total. Only one stood out: a 24-year-old laborer named Kazo Ichikawa. His blood type was B, matching what had been found during the forensic exam. But more than biology, it was his behavior that raised red flags. He had claimed his blood type was A, an odd thing to lie about unless you had something to hide. And then there was the matter of the missing shovel, the one possibly used to dig the shallow grave. It had vanished around the same time Ichikawa started acting nervous. The deeper police looked, the darker Ichikawa's past became. He had dropped out of elementary school. Teachers described him as short-tempered, disengaged, and prone to outbursts. He couldn't read well. He couldn't write more than a few words. He drifted from job to job: metal factory, day laborer, even a babysitter at one point. But everywhere he went, trouble followed. He was fired for theft. In another town, he had stolen construction materials. Then chickens. Then uniforms. He gambled. He drank. He fought. And somehow, he always managed to slip through the cracks. More disturbing, Ichikawa had direct access to the pig farm near where Yoshiko's body was found. Witnesses reported he'd laughed and joked at the scene after her body was discovered, making light of the crowd that had gathered. To the police, this wasn't just suspicious, it was cold. They were convinced. But in the shadows of class prejudice and rushed judgment, the line between guilt and scapegoat had already started to blur. On June 17th, the police made their move. Kazo Ichikawa was arrested, not for murder, but for theft and fighting. But behind closed doors, investigators had only one focus: the death of Yoshiko Nakata. At first, Ichikawa resisted. He denied everything, said he was at home, said his family could vouch for him. But the interrogation didn't stop. For days, questions came in waves. His alibi was shaky. His home had a structure where someone could easily leave unnoticed. Then, just 3 days in, he cracked. Ichikawa confessed, not to murder, but to helping. He admitted to writing the ransom note, to moving the body, to drawing a map for the police, showing where Yoshiko's bag had been hidden. Officers believed they finally had their man. The public pressure was immense. This case needed resolution, and now they had it. Or so they thought, because just as quickly as he confessed, Ichikawa changed his story. He said the police had coerced him, that they made promises, threatened consequences, manipulated his fear. He claimed he was told, "Just admit it, serve 10 years, and we'll let you go." His new version? He'd gone to play pachinko. He'd taken shelter from the rain. He had no idea who Yoshiko was. The statements contradicted one another, wildly. His stories didn't align. Times changed. Events blurred. One version placed him near the school. Another had him nowhere near the scene. And suddenly, what looked like closure cracked open into chaos once again. On March 11th, 1964, less than a year after Yoshiko's body was found, Kazo Ichikawa stood before the court. His face was thin, his voice quiet, and in front of a nation starving for closure, he confessed. "Again, if I harm someone with no reason, God would not forgive me," he said. And with those words, the judge handed down the ultimate sentence, death. Applause followed. Headlines praised the swift justice. The public, angry and grieving, finally had a villain to point at. The case, it seemed, was over. But behind the bars, Ichikawa's story was only beginning. Months later, he changed his tune once more. The confession? He claimed it was never real. He said police fed him lines during the interrogation, that he was mentally and physically pressured until he broke. "I only confessed," he said, "because they promised I'd be free in 10 years. He accused investigators of coaching him through the script, planting evidence, and manipulating the investigation to make the puzzle fit. And slowly, cracks began to show. His new version of events clashed with everything he'd said in court. He spoke of pachinko parlors and rain-soaked roofs. He couldn't remember key details he once described vividly. Lawyers were confused. The media was divided. What was unfolding wasn't just a retrial, it was chaos. A man who once admitted everything now claimed innocence. But was he telling the truth now? Or simply trying to survive a system already set against him? As the appeal process began, the case shifted from criminal to political, and the real storm had just begun. The courtroom drama may have ended in a sentence, but outside the walls of justice, something far more sinister was unfolding. One by one, the people connected to the Sazama case began to disappear into silence, into accidents, into death. It started with whispers, the kind of uneasy coincidences people try to ignore. But over time, the list grew too long, too strange, too deliberate. First, a landlord close to the Nakata family was found dead at the bottom of a well. Officially, suicide by pesticide. Then came the insurance man who had worked with police, stabbed in the chest, alone in his home. A young man living at the same address as Ichikawa vanished without a trace. By March 1964, a respected education official, present at the ransom exchange, died suddenly from an unexplained seizure. And Yoshiko's own sister, Mia, followed just months later, dead for what was labeled an overdose. By now, the press couldn't ignore it. Former witnesses, workers, even the farm manager's brother, struck by a train, the record of the train schedule destroyed the same day. A reporter who chased the truth for years was attacked in a mountain pass. He died 2 days later. A court witness who testified in 1966? Gone. Disappeared like smoke. In total, more than 10 deaths, each linked to someone who knew something, saw something, or said too much. Whispers became rumors. Rumors became theories. Was someone cleaning up loose ends? Was this the work of one man? Or a shadow network with far more to lose than just a conviction? In Sazama, people stopped asking questions. They were too afraid to end up on that growing list. As the years passed, something strange happened. The case refused to fade. Kazo Ichikawa's name kept surfacing, not as a villain, but as a victim. Behind prison walls, he wrote letters, poems, even gratitude to those who believed in his innocence. Outside, those voices were getting louder. Advocacy groups, most notably the Baraka Liberation League, stepped in. They weren't just defending a man, they were defending a people. The Burakumin, Japan's historically marginalized caste, had long been treated as invisible, dirty, or dangerous. To them, Ichikawa wasn't just a suspect, he was a scapegoat, offered up to satisfy a society that still feared the lower classes. Protests sparked. Documentaries were made. 4Media picked up the case. What began as a murder investigation evolved into a movement. Ichikawa became a symbol of police corruption, of class-based injustice, of a nation unwilling to face its own prejudice. Legal experts began reviewing the original evidence. Mistakes were found. Missing files, conflicting testimonies, mishandled forensic work. And then came the twist that shook the country. In 1994, after 31 years behind bars, the court granted Ichikawa's release. He walked out of prison not as a free man, but as a question mark. Had justice been served, or had it been delayed for over 3 decades? The case was reopened, the narrative rewritten, and Japan found itself staring down a new mystery. If Ichikawa didn't do it, then who did? Freedom didn't silence the storm. If anything, it made the noise louder. After Ichikawa's release in 1994, a full reinvestigation was launched. What they found wasn't just unsettling, it was devastating. The so-called evidence that once secured his death sentence began to crumble, piece by piece. Experts re-examined the handwriting on a ransom letter and found it was likely written by someone with a much higher literacy level, far beyond what Ichikawa, a school dropout, could have managed. Then came the DNA, the blood type match, based on outdated testing. Modern techniques couldn't conclusively link him to the crime. Even the infamous footprints didn't align. Using 3D analysis, forensic scientists determined they didn't match the rubber shoes found in his home. Worse, the very objects that supposedly tied him to the case, Yoshiko's pen, her watch, the shovel, were all suspiciously discovered during follow-up searches after police had already combed those areas multiple times. Many began to suspect these items weren't found, but planted. So the question returns, heavier than ever. If not Ichikawa, then who? And why would someone go to such great lengths to frame a poor farmhand with no real power or voice? Was he a convenient sacrifice in a time of public outrage? A target chosen not for what he did, but for what he represented? No one knows. The case remains open, unsolved, and stained by doubt. Yoshiko Nakata's killer has never been definitively identified, and the silence surrounding Sazama still feels unnatural, like a ghost that refuses to rest.